Chapter 412. Perfected Tianlan? Song Wenji looked surprised, and a strange expression flashed across her charming face. Obviously, no one could remain calm after hearing the name of perfected deity of Huashan realm. Immortal Tiehu was not surprised at all. He was a perfected deity of Huashan realm, and he was used to similar situations over the years. He snorted coldly and said, "It's that person. A few days ago, I was working in Donghai. Everything was going well. There were a few local troublemakers who were dissatisfied, but they were quickly suppressed by me. It seemed that everything would be completed after a period of time, but at this time, he came out and intervened." Song Wenji's bright and clear eyes turned, and she said softly, "Does he want to be enemies with you, foster father? Logically speaking, it shouldn't be. You are all perfected deity of Zhengxianmeng, and you often see each other. You won't fall out because of such a small matter." Immortal Tiehu smacked his lips, looking a little annoyed and helpless. He said, "Of course I won't fall out with you. To be honest, Tianlan didn't really go against me, but he still did something that disgusted me." "What's so serious that it made you so angry?" Song Wenji asked in surprise. Her charming face was slightly red, and she looked like a beautiful flower in full bloom. Immortal Tiehu glanced at her, and his expression softened a lot. He chuckled, put his right hand around Song Wenji's waist, and let her sit on his lap. At the same time, he held her soft white hand and gently stroked it. Then he said grumpily, "There is a school called Bloodwing sect in Donghai. There are 5 devils in the sect who have always been against us. Of course, I couldn't be polite to them, so I used the power of thunder and made them flee in panic. However, when I was about to completely subdue them, Tianlan suddenly jumped out and told me that 2 of the Bloody Wing 5 devils wanted to seek refuge with us, and took out their handwritten letters to announce to the world. In the end, he also expressed that he cherished talents and was willing to be their guarantor, as long as they were willing to work for Zhengxianmeng and make meritorious deeds to atone for their crimes." When Song Wenji heard this, her expression immediately changed. She frowned and said, "Isn't this jumping out to steal the credit? What about the hard work that foster father has done before?" True Lord Tiehu nodded his head, his face revealing an expression that said exactly so. He said angrily, "Exactly so, that's why I'm angry. But it's not a good thing to do. If I flatly refuse, I'll have a reputation of being intolerant and close to falling out with Tianlan. But if I accept it just like that, I'll feel that I've suffered a grievance in silence. It's too disgusting." Song Wenji sighed, her face showing some distress. She used her palm to gently rub True Lord Tiehu's chest a few times. At the same time, she appeared to be in deep thought. After a while, she said to True Lord Tiehu tentatively, "Foster father, no matter what, you and True Lord Tianlan are both bigwigs in Zhengxianmeng. Don't tell me that all these years, you and the other divine transformation realm supremes have never made any agreements or promises, such as not meddling in other people's affairs?" True Lord Tiehu said, "Of course there are such rules, and they are written rules. So you see, the 6 supremes in the immortal allies are all in charge of their own duties, and none of them will interfere with each other. My Tianlai Hall and Tianlan's Fuyunji will never have any interaction. But these are all things that are clear on the surface. It's different from this time." He suddenly spoke and interfered in the affairs of the Bloody Wing 5 devils. "Anyway, he has the reputation of cherishing talents, so I really can't do anything to him." Song Wenji sighed, looking a little annoyed and worried. She said, "Hey, what should we do? Really, perfected Lord Tianlan is a person of such high status after all. Why is he still so unreliable in handling matters?" Hearing her words, True Lord Tiehu seemed to be in a much better mood. Instead, he laughed and comforted this beautiful little girl. He said with a smile, all right, it's just a small matter. Although the Bloody Wing 5 devils are famous outside, in my opinion, they are only slightly stronger than ordinary people. It's not worth worrying about. What I'm angry about is the tacit agreement between us supremes, but Tianlan suddenly broke it and attacked us. What does this mean?" As he spoke, True Lord Tiehu seemed to be angry again. He complained to Song Wenji, "What do you think this is?" He stood up and shouted to the world that the Bloody Wing 5 devils are a pity and that they are loyal to the right path. But what about the things I did before? Didn't I, Tiehu, become a bad person who suppressed talents and excluded dissidents? His eyes are like torches, and Bolo has his eyes on a horse of 1,000 li. Doesn't this make me seem stubborn and stupid? Song Wenji couldn't help but burst into laughter. She said in a spoiled manner in true Lord Tiehu's arms, "Father, how can you say that about yourself?" Hearing her coquettish grumble, Immortal Tiehu shook his head with a smile. He sighed and said, "Well, it's really not a big deal. It's just that Tianlan is a little insidious. But I have said a lot of harsh words to Fuyunji a few days ago. Could it be that this old man is dissatisfied and deliberately picked a fight with me this time?" Speaking of this, true Lord Tiehu's brows slowly frowned. There was a hint of thought in his eyes. It seemed that he really began to think about this possibility. Song Wenji glanced at him, and a glimmer of light flashed deep in her eyes. Then she held true Lord Tiehu's arm and shook it gently. She said with a smile, "Forget it, father. Don't think about this kind of trouble. If you are really angry, why don't you think of a way to disgust him in other ways?" True Lord Tiehu's thoughts were interrupted by her, but he didn't care. His eyes lit up and he said with a smile, "Well, what you said is somewhat reasonable. This time, I don't want to argue about the matter of the Bloody Wing sect. After all, there is such a Zhengxianmeng here. Everyone has to make a living. If we fall out because of this small matter, we may become the public enemy of the immortal allies. It's not worth it. So, if you want to get back at him," he thought for a moment and said, "among the subordinates of Tianlan, the one with the most problems must be Fuyunji. If I can really find a loophole, I will definitely let him know the rules and regulations of Tianlu Hall." Song Wenji said with a smile, "Is there anything I can help you with?" True Monarch Tai who laughed out loud. He used his hand to lightly pinch Song Wenji's delicate face and said, "There is no need for that. There are a bunch of trivial matters at the Fuyan Company, but the water inside is still very deep. You should not get involved. But there is another thing that you may be able to help me with." Song Wenji straightened up and said, "What is it?" "Father, just tell me. I will definitely help you." True Lord Tiehu took out a piece of white paper from his bosom and handed it to Song Wenji. He said lightly, "This is a list I just received. It is said that Tianlan is secretly sending people to investigate the people above, but I don't know what his purpose is. If you have time, help me keep an eye on it." Song Wenji was stunned for a moment. Her face showed a trace of a strange expression. She reached out and slowly took the white paper. At the same time, she looked at Tiehu and said, "This thing should be the secret of Fuyunji. How could you?" True Lord Tiehu stretched himself and looked calm. He smiled and said, "You see, there are always some people with lofty ideals. Although they are in the enemy camp, their hearts are with Tianlu Hall." Song Wenji covered her mouth and smiled. She nodded and agreed. At the same time, her eyes flickered and swept over the white paper in her hand. Chapter 413. If we don't have the reputation of killing Baldi, if we are just ordinary people with no background or backing, then is there any way for me to meet those high and mighty deity stage cultivators in Zhengxianmeng? When they went out that morning, Lu Chen very casually asked Old Ma like a joke. Old Ma looked a little surprised, glanced at him, then frowned and pondered for a moment. In the end, he still shook his head and said, "If it is really like what you said, the difference in status is too big. In my opinion, you can't meet them." Lu Chen walked with him to the horse-washing bridge, looking at the river flowing under the bridge, sighed at the same time and said, "So the gap between people is so big." "Nonsense." Old Ma snorted at Lu Chen's sigh, said with a disdainful expression, "You have been in the devil sect for 10 years, and then you were forced to hide for more than 10 years. I don't believe you don't understand this kind of common sense. Don't pretend to be a young man who doesn't know anything." "Ha ha ha." Lu Chen laughed, reached out and patted Old Ma's shoulder, said with a smile, "You are good at everything, but sometimes your mouth is too poisonous. Don't say I didn't advise you. I don't care when you talk to me, but when you meet those big shots. When I meet people like Lord Zhengxianmeng, I am always honest, groveling and respectfully hugging their thighs." Old Ma said. Lu Chen paused, looked at Old Ma and said with a smile, "You are really an honest person." "Thank you." "Get lost." The two continued to walk forward, and after walking for a while, Old Ma suddenly broke the silence, said to Lu Chen, "In fact, that matter just now, it can't be said that there is no way." Lu Chen's footsteps slightly paused, as if a little surprised, said, "What do you mean?" Old Ma also looked at him, but did not answer immediately, just stared at him for a moment, said, "If you and I are unknown civilians, naturally we are not qualified to go to heaven to listen. So the first thing we need to do is, of course, to become famous. Maybe we can win a good reputation, or maybe we will have a bad reputation. In short, we have to be famous to the ears of those big shots. Then we will naturally have a chance, right?" Lu Chen shrugged, said, "These days to be famous, especially to be famous to the attention of a deity lord, is not an easy thing." "That's right." Old Ma patted him on the shoulder with a faint smile on his face. "So you should behave yourself and not cause any more trouble." Lu Chen did not ask what Old Ma meant by "don't cause more trouble," and Old Ma did not ask what Lu Chen meant by asking those deity lord, intentionally or unintentionally. They just talked about this topic, and then the two did not mention it again. "What is the name of the person we are looking for today?" Old Ma asked Lu Chen. "Rui Xiaotian." "What does he do?" Lu Chen thought for a moment, then said, "I think he is a butcher." Old Ma was stunned for a moment, then nodded without saying anything. No matter who heard the name Rui Xiaotian for the first time, the first reaction in their mind would probably be that perhaps this was a cheerful and lively young man, standing on a certain street in Immortal City on a sunny day, turning around with a handsome smile under the light shining from the sky. The truth seemed to be more or less the same. Rui Xiaotian was a butcher, but at the same time, he was also a handsome and young butcher. He had his own small butcher shop in the neighborhood of White Tiger District. Unlike the bloody and slightly dirty butcher shops that people imagined, Rui Xiaotian's butcher shop had always been very clean and tidy. Every day, he would put a fixed amount of meat on the counter of the butcher shop facing the street, clearly marked the price, and never cheated the old or the young. Every day, he would call it a day. Although the people in the neighborhood were willing to buy meat from him because the meat in his shop was clean and fresh, he never increased the daily quantity. Of course, most of the people who came to buy meat were women from the nearby streets. It was rare to see a young and good-looking butcher like Rui Xiaotian. It was said that men were lustful and liked beautiful women, but when they met a young man who was equally good-looking, those women in their 20s and 30s were not shy at all, and would often squeeze into his shop. Every time they bought meat, they would tease and joke around, but Rui Xiaotian would just smile and not care. As time went by, the butcher shop's business became the best in the neighborhood. With more people coming to buy the meat naturally sold faster. On this day, all the meat was sold out in less than 2 hours after the stall was opened. As usual, Rui Xiaotian politely and warmly apologized to the neighbors standing outside the shop. He smiled and said that he would see them again tomorrow. Then he cleaned up the shop and closed the door early. When the door closed, the butcher shop seemed to be isolated from the outside world. It seemed that the noise had also suddenly left this place. Rui Xiaotian stretched his back, then turned his neck and moved his arms, and walked toward the back of the shop. This shop was actually his home. The front was selling meat, and the back was a place to rest and live. He was still so young, so of course he was not married, and he did not have any relatives here. He was the only one in such a huge house. Just when Rui Xiaotian was about to walk back to his bedroom as usual, his body suddenly trembled when he walked through the corridor. He saw that there was suddenly an extra person in the small courtyard beside the corridor in the house. The courtyard was very small, only a few feet in length and width, so there was not much to put in. There was only a tree planted in the middle. A peach tree. This was the season when peach blossoms were in full bloom. Pink flowers bloomed all over the branches, and the wind that blew seemed to carry the intoxicating fragrance of peach blossoms. However, Rui Xiaotian's expression did not look good. There was surprise and shock on his face as he looked at the person who suddenly appeared in his house. It was a young and exceptionally beautiful woman. "Hello." Amidst this suddenly frozen and stunned atmosphere, it was actually that beautiful and charming woman who was currently standing under the peach tree who smiled at him, and then greeted him. Rui Xiaotian subconsciously swallowed his saliva and said, "Hello. Miss, how did you get in?" The door in front wasn't closed, so I walked in by myself. The beautiful woman smiled and looked very gentle. Rui Xiaotian looked back in surprise. In his impression, he should have closed the door every time. However, after thinking about it carefully, he seemed to be a little uncertain. He thought to himself, did this woman casually walk in while I was still selling meat? He coughed and said, Miss, actually, I'm the only one living in this house. There's no one else here. I believe you also accidentally walked in. I'll take you out. As he said that, he turned around and made a pleased gesture. His attitude was gentle and polite. If the women on the street outside saw him, they would inevitably feel sorry for him. However, the beautiful woman in front of him seemed to be a little different. She smiled and looked at Rui Xiaotian, then nodded and said, There's really something wrong with you. Chapter 414. The profession of a butcher is a matter of taking lives. Every day, his hands are stained with blood, and he cuts off flesh and bones. Over the years, even the calmest person will be tempered into a violent and ruthless person. The woman looked at the butcher Rui Xiaotian. Although she made him sound very fierce, there was no fear in her expression. She even smiled and said, It's the first time I've seen a butcher as gentle and refined as you. Rui Xiaotian stood where he was and his expression changed slightly. After a moment of silence, he said, You're exaggerating. There are no absolutes in this world. Perhaps I'm an exception? Also, I don't think you just happened to pass by here. May I know your name? The charming woman smiled and said, My name is Song Wenji. Rui Xiaotian pondered for a moment as if going through his memory. He then looked at Song Wenji and said, I don't think I've known you before, Miss Song. May I know why you're looking for me? Song Wenji didn't answer his question. She casually plucked a branch of peach blossom from the peach tree beside her and sniffed it lightly. Then she said lightly, How can there be so many coincidences in this world? It's just that everyone can't see that far ahead. You're pretending to be a butcher, but you don't look like one. There are probably only two possibilities. Rui Xiaotian sounded a little curious. He said, I'll have to ask you about that. Please teach me, Mississippi, Song Wenji said. I wouldn't dare to teach you. I'm just spouting nonsense. The first possibility is that you've been pretending to be a butcher all along. You've been using this line of work to cover your tracks. You've never been a butcher, so your temperament naturally hasn't changed. Rui Xiaotian nodded and said, that makes sense. What about the second possibility? Song Wenji looked at the young and handsome butcher and said with a smile, The second possibility is that although you're really a butcher now, you've done things more ruthless than a butcher in the past. You've killed so many people that you've naturally become numb to it. Am I right? Rui Xiaotian's expression turned cold, and he suddenly stopped talking. The small courtyard suddenly quietened down. Only the sound of the wind blowing through the peach tree could be heard. Other than that, the atmosphere suddenly turned somber. Separated by a corridor, the man and the woman stared at each other coldly. After some time, Rui Xiaotian suddenly said, Miss Song, who exactly are you, and why are you looking for me? Just as Song Wenji was about to speak, a series of knocks came from the door of the butcher shop that was already closed. Song Wenji and Rui Xiaotian's expressions did not change much. They were still looking at each other with a hint of vigilance in their eyes, and they did not intend to look elsewhere. After a while, Rui Xiaotian said in a clear voice, This shop is closed. Please go back and come back early tomorrow. The knocks on the door stopped, probably having heard Rui Xiaotian's words. Rui Xiaotian looked at Song Wenji, took a deep breath, and was about to speak again. Knock, 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 knock. Suddenly, the same knocking sound came from the door again, and it broke the tranquility of this place once more. This time, Song Wenji and Rui Xiaotian's expressions changed. They looked at each other almost at the same time, but then they saw the surprise in each other's eyes. It seemed that the possibility of the other party's helper could be ruled out. Rui Xiaotian was silent for a moment, then turned to the door, raised his voice, and said with a hint of sternness, This shop is closed for the day. Please go back. Knock, 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 knock. The knocks on the door seemed to completely ignore his words, and they were still knocking persistently. For a moment, The shop was in complete silence, and it seemed that only the strange and inexplicable knocks on the door were still echoing. Rui Xiaoyan's expression became a little strange. After a moment of silence, he looked at Song Wenji and pointed in the direction of the door. Song Wenji hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Rui Xiaotian turned and walked to the door. He did not walk fast, and it could be seen that his hands were always by his side as he walked. He did not even swing them naturally like ordinary people, which made his walking posture look a little awkward and strange. Song Wenji soon noticed this. She stared at Rui Xiaotian, and a hint of contemplation flashed across her eyes. The butcher's shop was only so big, so it did not take long for Rui Xiaotian to reach the door. Just as he was about to reach out to open the door, the knocks on the door suddenly disappeared. Without any warning, he suddenly disappeared. Like a ghost, the silence instantly occupied the small courtyard, and Rui Xiaotian, who had just raised his hand, froze. The door was still tightly shut, but the knocks outside the door were gone. It was as if the person who had been waiting outside for a long time had finally lost his patience and left at that moment. However, neither Rui Xiaotian nor Song Wenji believed this possibility. Their expressions were a little ugly. After a while, Rui Xiaotian reached out and opened the door. The noise from the street outside could be heard, but there was no one outside the butcher's shop. It was as if nothing had happened, as if the knocks just now had never happened. Rui Xiaotian stood at the door and watched for a while before quietly closing the door again. He turned around and walked back to face Song Wenji again. He frowned and said, "Miss Song, who exactly are you?" Song Wenji thought about it and said, "I'm from Zhengxianmeng." Zhengxianmeng? Rui Xiaotian was stunned for a moment, and he seemed to be a little surprised by the answer. He then frowned and said, "I don't think I've ever offended Zhengxianmeng." "Why are you looking for me?" Song Wenji was about to speak, but her and Rui Xiaoyan's expressions changed almost at the same time, and they turned to look. At the other end of the courtyard, Rui Xiaoyan's bedroom was at the end of the corridor. At this moment, the door of the bedroom suddenly squeaked and opened. A man walked out of the room and stood at the door. He met Rui Xiaotian and Song Wenji's gazes and smiled. "Hello, I'm Lu Chen." Rui Xiaoyan's pupils shrank slightly. He looked at Lu Chen, and then at the charming woman standing under the peach tree, Song Wenji. His expression finally lost its smile and calmness, and he shouted with a hint of anger, "Who are you? Also, how dare you break into my bedroom?" Lu Chen's expression was calm, as if he didn't care about Rui Xiaoyan's harsh words. He just said indifferently, "I'm also from Zhengxianmeng. As for my identity, I should be the one asking you." Rui Xiaotian flew into a rage. Just as he was about to scold him, he heard Lu Chen say, "Stop pretending. Ordinary people won't secretly make two escape routes in their own homes. Let me be frank. One is in the bedroom behind me, and you can't get through it. As for the other one, Miss Song hasn't done anything from the beginning to the end. She's just standing under the peach tree. So the second escape route must be under the peach tree, under her feet. Am I right?" he said to Rui Xiaotian with a smile, looking like he was looking at a dog in a desperate situation. Chapter 4:15. The three people in the courtyard formed a triangle. After Lu Chen said that last sentence, there was a long period of silence. Rui Xiaoyan's expression changed rapidly, turning green and white. Meanwhile, Song Wenji's attention seemed to have shifted from the young butcher to Lu Chen. She stared at Lu Chen with her bright and watery eyes, seemingly sizing up the man who had suddenly appeared curiously. After a while, Rui Xiaoyan's expression turned cold, and he said coldly, "What are the two of you trying to do by barging into my house uninvited? Is Zhengxianmeng so arrogant that he can't tolerate a person like me who stands aloof from worldly affairs? Because you stand aloof from worldly affairs, so you like to dig a hole in the ground alone?" Lu Chen asked. Rui Xiaoyan's expression became more and more terrible. Just as he was about to flare up, he suddenly heard Song Wenji ask, "Who are you?" The two men were stunned because Song Wenji did not speak to Rui Xiaotian this time. Instead, she looked at Lu Chen and asked, "You say that you work for Zhengxianmeng, but I've never seen you before. I'd like to ask, which hall under Zhengxianmeng do you belong to?" This beautiful woman had a gentle smile on her face, but her words weren't very polite. Lu Chen frowned and glanced at her. However, in the blink of an eye, he was suddenly stunned. He saw the charming and beautiful Song Wenji standing under the blooming peach tree in front of him. When the spring breeze blew past the treetops, the peach blossoms trembled and shone brilliantly. The person under the flowers was incomparably beautiful. It suddenly overlapped with a certain scene in his memory. At that moment, Lu Chen seemed to be stunned. Song Wenji also furrowed her beautiful and delicate brows. She was naturally very confident in her own appearance. She was also well aware of her own charm. After all, relying on these things, she had even grabbed onto the world's most powerful backer. Because of this, she would often encounter other men who were attracted by her beauty. Most of the time, she would just laugh it off. Those who knew her background would keep a respectful distance from her, and those who didn't know her background were far worse than her, so it wasn't worth getting angry over. However, one afternoon, she suddenly felt that the man named Lu Chen was looking at her very strangely. She wasn't disgusted or disgusted by it. She just felt that it was a little strange. In that man's eyes, there was no greed, desire, jealousy, possessiveness, or even some hidden brutality that other men around her had when they looked at her in the past. Song Wenji even felt that this man called Lu Chen didn't seem to be looking at her, even though his eyes were looking at the peach tree at that moment. His eyes were gloomy and somewhat empty, as if his gaze had actually penetrated his own body, and was looking at a place even further away. He seemed to be looking at something else. He seemed to be looking at someone else? Who is that person? In the great hall of Heavenly Law Hall, on a wide and lofty throne, Taihu Immortal, who was revered by the world, gently hugged Song Wenji and asked her with a smile. Song Wenji nestled beside this old, but still incomparably powerful old man. Her intelligent and charming eyes flashed. As if thinking for a moment, she said, "I don't know about this after all. I have never seen this Lu Chen before. But the way I looked at him, he probably thought of someone else from me, maybe also a woman." She pouted and said in a low voice, looking a little unhappy and a little angry. Taihu Immortal immediately broke into laughter. He stretched out his hand and lovingly pinched Song Wenji's fair and delicate little face. He said with a smile, "There is no shadow of this. You really know how to let your imagination run wild." Song Wenji didn't laugh. Instead, she pursed her lips and said with a little coquettishness and determination, "I have this kind of feeling, and my feeling is very accurate." Good, good, good. You are right, you are right. Taihu Immortal was a little helpless, but he still raised his hand and shook it affectionately. Then he asked again, "Did he tell you his identity in the end? And what is the background of that butcher?" Song Wenji said, "That butcher called Rui Xiaotian really has some tricks up his sleeves. While I was talking with that Lu Chen, he suddenly pressed some unknown mechanism, and several places in the courtyard exploded at the same time. The power was really not small, and that Lu Chen and I were caught off guard. We were busy dodging, but he took advantage of the chaos and slipped away." Escaped? Taihu Immortal frowned slightly. Song Wenji nodded. If it were other subordinates of Heavenly Law Hall who saw Taihu Immortal's dignified appearance, they would probably be so scared that their legs would turn to jelly. But Song Wenji's expression was calm, as if she didn't care at all, and Taihu Immortal really didn't blame her at all. And then? Which Immortal Alliance Hall does that Lu Chen belong to? Taihu Immortal asked Song Wenji. Song Wenji said, "He didn't say. I wanted to keep him, but this person's ability is very strange, and it is very different from the common Tao and divine powers. I was not careful, and actually let him escape." Taihu Immortal was silent for a moment, and said, "So it seems that this person is most likely from Fuyunji. First, this name list originally came from Fuyunji. Other than us, if someone else came, probably only Fuyunji would do it. Second, who knows how many monsters of unknown origin and identity are hidden in Fuyunji. This area has always been unfathomable, and such strange people are the most common." Song Wenji nodded and said, "Godfather, you are right. In fact, before this, I also suspected Fuyunji, but I really didn't have any evidence, so I didn't dare to say it." At this point, she paused and said, "But about that Rui Xiaotian who ran away, I feel that he is a bit like a person." Tai Hu Immortal raised his eyebrows and said, "Who is it?" Rue Mo, ranked 3rd among the 5 devils of Bloodwing sect. Tai Hu Immortal looked deeply at Song Wenji and said, "Why do you say so?" Song Wenji said, "Legend has it that Rue Mo is most proficient in mechanisms and unorthodox techniques. Every time he goes to a place, he would often secretly explore and set up layers of mechanisms, which is very much like his style. Also, the surname Rue is the same as Rue Mo. You should know that there are not many people with the surname Rue in this world." Tai Hu Immortal was silent for a moment, and shook his head. "You have talked for a long time, but there is no concrete evidence, so you can't take it seriously." Song Wenji didn't seem to be too surprised by Tai Hu Immortal's reaction. Perhaps she knew that this deity-stage true lord, who had always been fair and honest, was like this. But at this time, she didn't care about the background of the 2 men, because she had more important things to say to Tai Hu Immortal. "Godfather, I thought of something." "Say it." "If our previous guess is correct, Fuyunji and Bloodwing sect are involved in today's matter. From this, I also thought of the matter with Bloodwing sect. Lord Tianlan didn't give you face." "Humph." Tai Hu Immortal snorted coldly without expression, but didn't say anything. Song Wenji gently pulled his arm, and then said in a low voice, "If this is really the case, I think there is a way to let you go to Lord Tianlan and fight back." Tai Hu Immortal was startled, looking slightly surprised, and then said with a smile, "I didn't expect you to be so smart now, tell me about it." Song Wenji smiled, and said with a charming face, "Lord Tianlan took 2 people who defected to the enemy and pretended to be good people. Then you can do the same." Tai Hu Immortal's heart moved, and then he revealed a trace of a smile, and said, "Don't tell me you mean." Song Wenji said with a smile, "Of the 5 demons of Bloodwing sect, 2 ran away, and the remaining ones are probably the 3 brothers." The woman leaned against Tai Hu Immortal, and then said with a smile, "The same thing that Lord did. Can't you do it?" Tai Hu Immortal clapped his hands and laughed and said, "Exactly." Chapter 416. Who is that woman? Have you seen her before? In a courtyard deep in the alley of Horse-Washing Bridge, Lu Chun and Old Ma sat in the courtyard and drank together. After drinking a cup of wine, Lu Chun asked Old Ma. Old Ma shook his head and said, "I have never seen that woman, so I really don't know where she came from." As he spoke, he paused and pondered for a moment before continuing. "For the first 10 years, you and I lived in Qingshitang village. In recent years, after you escaped to the south to the land of chaos, I only helped out with some trivial matters. In the end, I moved to Qingshitang village. Hence, apart from knowing a little about the Floating Clouds Agency, I basically know nothing about the other halls in the Immortal Alliance." Lu Chen nodded. It seemed like he knew what Old Ma was talking about. After thinking for a moment, he said, "That woman claimed to be from Zhangxianming, but I don't think she's from Fuyunji. Otherwise, there would be news from that damn Baldian Shuang. How about this? When you have time, go and find out if there's a woman called Song Wenji in the Immortal Alliance. Find out where she came from." Old Ma said, "No problem, leave it to me." Lu Chen smiled and reached for the wine pot. He started pouring wine into Old Ma's and his own cups. The next morning, Lu Chen and Old Ma woke up early. After tidying up, as usual, Lu Chen threw a large piece of demon beast meat to Atsu and sent the black dog away. These few days, Atsu lived like a deity. Every day, it either ate or slept. Apart from the fact that it couldn't drink, it was really a drunken life. After sending Atsu away, Lu Chen and Old Ma walked out together. Old Ma said to Lu Chen, "Today, I will go to Fuyunji to find Hall Leader Shuiying and tell her about the recent events. I will also ask about the woman from yesterday." Lu Chen nodded and said, "Okay, go. But I'm afraid you won't get an answer soon. Don't rush back today. Do your work there." Old Ma looked at him and said, "What about you? Where do you plan to go today? Are you going to find the next person on the list?" Lu Chen hesitated and shook his head. "No, I will stop for today. I feel that this matter is a bit strange. There seems to be something I don't understand. I need to think more about it." After a pause, he said to Old Ma, "Today, I will find a chance to go to the butcher shop from yesterday to see if there is anything else I missed. That Rui Xiaotian's identity must be strange. Maybe that woman called Song Wenji knows something? Old Ma nodded and said, "That's good. Be careful." After saying that, he left. Lu Chen watched Old Ma's back disappear into the busy street under the horse-washing bridge. After staring for a long time, he turned a corner and walked on another road. Of course, the butcher shop from yesterday did not open for business today. This also made the ladies in the neighborhood, who usually like to buy meat here, very disappointed. Before Lu Chen came, he was a little worried that these people might go to the butcher shop to see what was going on. If they did, the situation inside would inevitably be exposed. In the lightning-fast battle yesterday, the mysterious butcher Rui Xiaotian suddenly triggered some traps, causing chaos and taking the opportunity to escape. Then Lu Chen and Song Wenji couldn't catch up, and each had their own concerns, so they left one after another. However, those traps were set in the house. In fact, from the outside, at least there was nothing wrong with the butcher shop. This was what Lu Chen was worried about when he came over. However, to his surprise, although the butcher shop was closed, it did not attract the attention of anyone, including the ladies in the neighborhood who came here every day to buy meat or to look at its face. Some of them walked to the door of the butcher shop, and often stopped for a moment before turning around and walking away. They did not have any intention of knocking on the door to inquire. This also made Lu Chen feel a little surprised. After a while, when no one went over, Lu Chen walked out from a hidden corner on the opposite street, and then pretended to be passing by, walking in front of the butcher shop. In the next moment he suddenly frowned, as he found that there was a note pasted on the door of the butcher shop, with a few lines written on it. The owner's mother is seriously ill, and had to return overnight to take care of her. Our shop will be temporarily closed for a month. Please forgive us for any inconvenience caused. The note was not particularly large, but it was still very conspicuous on the door. At the same time, the handwriting on it was neat and tidy, and it looked not bad. It was probably because of this note that the women who came over had to leave. Lu Chen did not stop in front of the butcher shop, and even his eyes seemed to only glance at the note before walking over. An hour later, Lu Chen had already jumped in from a hidden wall at the back of the house without anyone noticing. The house was silent, and there was no movement at all. However, the messy debris scattered on the ground seemed to be telling the story of the sudden chaos yesterday. As for the original owner of the house, he was naturally nowhere to be found. Lu Chen stood in the small courtyard and thought about it, but he still could not find any clues from the magic power that Rui Xiaotian used when he escaped yesterday. He turned around and saw the peach tree from yesterday. The blooming peach blossoms were swaying in the spring breeze, and it seemed like nothing had changed. Compared to the mess around it, this peach tree was probably the only thing that was still neat and beautiful. Lu Chen stared at the blooming peach blossoms for a while, then walked over and entered Rui Xiaotian's bedroom. He was no stranger to this room. In fact, he had already searched this place carefully the day before and found a secret passage. However, apart from that, he did not find anything valuable. It seemed like he had more time today, so he searched more carefully than yesterday. However, as time passed, when he walked out of the bedroom again, what he found was exactly the same as the day before. However, Lu Chen did not look depressed. Instead, he seemed to be thinking about something. After pondering for a moment, he muttered to himself, "It's actually so clean? Could it be that he's also a shadow?" After standing at the door and thinking for a while, he walked towards the peach tree in the small courtyard. He had basically searched every place in this house, but Rui Xiaotian was so clean that he did not leave anything that could be used to trace his identity. Lu Chen even felt that if he had not seen Rui Xiaotian selling meat here with his own eyes yesterday, he might not have believed that this person lived here. However, there was one last place left. There were two secret passages in this house, one in the bedroom and the other under the peach tree. Song Wenji had been standing under this peach tree yesterday, and did not leave. Lu Chen had always suspected that there was something strange about that place, so he had to search it thoroughly today. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, he had already walked under the peach tree. A breeze blew past and his clothes fluttered slightly. In a trance, he seemed to have returned to the season when peach blossoms were in full bloom in Qingshitang village. Chapter 417. Lu Chen stood silently under the peach tree for a while, and his eyes became clear. He looked at the peach tree from head to toe, circled around it, and then patted the trunk with his hand. Listening to the low and solid sound coming from under his hand, Lu Chen could not help but frown slightly. Of course, the peach tree was real. From the pink peach blossoms on the branches to the roots of the tree, it was a real peach tree that was growing well. However, there was indeed a secret passage hidden under the peach tree, which Lu Chen had discovered when he came over yesterday. The woman named Song Wenji had been standing there, intentionally or unintentionally, blocking the young butcher's escape route. In the end, Rui Xiaotian was forced to detonate the final mechanism and escape in the chaos. Since the peach tree was real, the mechanism that could control the underground secret passage should not be on the tree. Lu Chen pondered for a moment, then squatted down and began to search the ground carefully, ignoring the dirt on the ground and the various junk left by the explosion yesterday. He searched the ground very carefully and skillfully, as if he had done this kind of thing more than once before. On this quiet morning, in this abandoned house, a man was lying on the ground, carefully searching for something under the peach tree. This scene looked funny and a little strange. However, this situation did not last for long. Lu Chen's body suddenly trembled, and he suddenly raised his head to look at the other end of the courtyard of the house. There was a trace of surprise and vigilance on his face. A figure gently flipped over from the wall over there, and landed on the ground. In the next moment, she also saw Lu Chen, who was still lying on the ground in the courtyard, and she was stunned for a moment. A gentle breeze blew past, sweeping past the blooming peach blossoms, bringing with it a few pink petals that floated and fell with the wind, floating on the ground between them. They looked at each other for a moment, and then Lu Chen sighed and said, "Why are you here?" Standing under the wall was an exceptionally beautiful girl, who even looked a little ethereal. It was White Lotus. At this moment, after the initial surprise, White Lotus quickly regained her composure. After smiling slightly, she walked over and stopped not far from Lu Chen. She smiled and said, "I'm here to look for you." Lu Chen clapped his hands and simply sat on the ground, too lazy to stand up. He said, "Why didn't you enjoy yourself in Zhengxianmeng on Sky Dragon Mountain, and come down the mountain to look for me? There's nothing here that's worth your time. If you really have so much time, I think you might as well hang out with that perfected Lord Tianlan. As long as he's in a good mood one day and teaches you a few moves, it should be enough for you to enjoy." However, White Lotus looked like she didn't care. She giggled and threw away her usual cold fairy-like appearance. Instead, she had a bit of a temper that a girl of her age should have. After curling her lips, she said, "I'm too lazy to stay on that mountain. It's so boring all day. Not to mention other things, just in the main hall of Zhengxianmeng on the mountain, you have to be careful of anyone. No one knows when the big shots behind them will suddenly be pulled out. It's so annoying." "Is that so?" Lu Chen smiled. Unconsciously, he felt that the girl in front of him, whom he hadn't seen for years, was much more pleasing to the eye than he remembered. He nodded and said, "You don't know how lucky you are. Maybe the lifelong dream of others is to be favored by a perfected lord of the divine transformation realm like you." White Lotus snorted and said disapprovingly, "What's there to dream about? I don't think there's anything strange about it. What about you? If it were you, would you feel flattered by such favor?" Lu Chen was stunned for a moment. It seemed that he didn't expect White Lotus to ask such an abrupt question, which caught him off guard. After pondering for a moment, Lu Chen suddenly smiled and shook his head. "Well, I'll probably have the same reaction as you. I really didn't misjudge you." White Lotus looked very happy. She even clapped her hands and said with a smile, "Well, don't talk nonsense. What are you doing here now?" Lu Chen didn't answer her question. Instead, he asked, "How did you know I was here, and why did you come here?" White Lotus laughed and said, "I already expected you to ask this question." She said, "I met Old Ma this morning and found out from him." Lu Chen shook his head and said, "Impossible. What kind of friendship does Old Ma have with you? It would be strange if he told you so clearly. If he told you to go to Kunlun Mountain thousands of miles away to find me, I might believe it more." White Lotus's face darkened. she said. What? Is old Ma such a bad person? Lu Chen sternly said. Yeah, rotten to the core, rotten to the core. White Lotus chuckled, looking like the beautiful peach blossoms beside her. Then she said with a smile. Well, in fact, Martial Uncle Tianlon told me that I had nothing to do. If I wanted to, I could come to work with you. Old Ma also heard this, so he told me your whereabouts. Lu Chen was silent for a moment, and then nodded. It seemed that he accepted White Lotus's words. Then White Lotus glanced at the messy courtyard and rooms around and asked him what happened here. Lu Chen hesitated for a moment, but he still gave White Lotus a brief explanation of what had happened here. When he was done, he said to her, according to my previous experience, I can see that there should be a secret passage hidden under this place, and the switch should be nearby. I was looking for it here just now. White Lotus said and took 2 steps forward. She looked a little curious and said, Do you want me to help you? Lu Chen waved his hand and said, No need. After that, he stood up and continued to search nearby. White Lotus was not angry. She stood quietly behind him and found a stone to sit down. Looking at Lu Chen's back, a faint light flashed in her bright eyes. Lu Chen did not look back. After a moment he suddenly said, How are you doing now? White Lotus shrugged and said, Pretty good. At least no one on Sky Dragon Mountain dares to disrespect me. Maybe they all think that I will be the successor of Martial Uncle Tianlon in the future. Lu Chen looked back at her and said, Isn't it? No. Lu Chen responded and turned back to continue searching. But after a while he suddenly said, If it were me, I probably wouldn't treat you so well. White Lotus put her hands on her knees and looked at the man's back. She said, Why? If it were you, what would you do to me? Lu Chen did not look back. He was still carefully searching the ground in front of him. At the same time he said lightly, After all, you are the last disciple of Hakushin Jinkuan. If it were me, I probably would have found a way to let you die without knowing why. White Lotus's expression changed slightly. Just as she was about to speak, she suddenly heard a low muffled sound, and then the ground under her feet trembled. After a moment, the ground under the peach tree suddenly sank, and then a narrow stone staircase extended downwards. Found it. Lu Chen stood up from the ground and said to White Lotus. Chapter 418. After discovering the entrance to the secret tunnel, Lu Chen did not enter it immediately. Instead, he stood outside the entrance and carefully observed it for a while. At the same time, he felt that there was a faint cold wind blowing out of the tunnel. He nodded slightly. Since there were signs of ventilation, it seemed that the tunnel below was not very shallow. There should be more to it. Lu Chen stood up and tidied up his clothes. He was about to go down when he suddenly saw White Lotus coming over from the corner of his eye. Lu Chen stopped and frowned. Why? Do you want to go down too? White Lotus said matter-of-factly, Martial Uncle Tianlon asked me to help you. Of course I will follow you. Besides, I'm a little curious about what's down there. Let's go down and have a look. Lu Chen said, We haven't figured out the identity and origin of these people. Maybe there will be some danger. Everything is fine for you. You are a superior person. Why do you come and take such a risk? White Lotus smiled and looked at Lu Chen. Are you talking about those who might die a violent death at any time, and who don't even know why they died? Lu Chen glanced at her. White Lotus's expression did not change. It seemed that what she had just said had nothing to do with her. Lu Chen was silent for a moment. He suddenly sighed and turned to walk up the stone steps of the tunnel. At the same time he said, Be careful. If there is any danger, I won't protect you. White Lotus responded. It seemed that she did not take his words to heart. She just followed Lu Chen. The stone steps of the tunnel were made of very ordinary stone. There were no decorations on the walls on both sides of the tunnel. It was just that everything was square. Although it was simple and crude, it was relatively comfortable to walk. After walking down for a while, the light dimmed. However, Lu Chen was prepared for this. He took out a flint and wood torch from his arms and directly lit a torch. At this time, White Lotus, who was behind him, was a little surprised. She said in astonishment, Do you actually carry a torch with you? How is that possible? Lu Chen said. Didn't I decide to explore this secret passage before I came here? So I naturally brought a torch in case of emergency. White Lotus replied with an "oh," and did not say anything else. As the two of them continued to descend, the surroundings were soon shrouded in darkness. Only the light from the torches illuminated the surroundings. White Lotus had unknowingly approached Lu Chen. This passageway was much longer than Lu Chen had imagined. Similarly, it was also much larger than the secret passageway he had found in the bedroom. In fact, the secret passage in the bedroom was more like a hidden vault. After walking for a short distance, it was just a small storage room. Lu Chen had already searched that area that day, but there was nothing worth paying attention to in the underground storeroom. It was precisely because of this that Lu Chen shifted his attention to this place. The cool wind blowing in their faces was still there. The light on the torch swayed from time to time, but the flame was burning very steadily. Obviously, there seemed to be plenty of air in this passageway. As Lu Chen walked, his eyes were staring ahead with great vigilance. But at this moment he suddenly heard White Lotus suddenly ask him, Lu Chen, if you were Martial Uncle Tianlan, would you really want to kill me? Lu Chen didn't even turn his head back as he continued walking forward. At the same time he said, you're living a good life now, and your status is respected as well. Normally, you're not even grounded. Since perfected Lord Tianlan is so good to you, do you think he will easily kill you? White Lotus bit her lower lip and said in a low voice, but you just said that Martial Uncle Tianlan is likely to want to kill me. Do you believe what I say? Lu Chen stopped and looked back at White Lotus. White Lotus was stunned and said, why? You still can't believe me? Lu Chen laughed and pointed to the front saying, hurry up. I feel that the cold wind is a little stronger in front. We have probably reached the flat ground. White Lotus looked back and saw that the way they came was now covered by darkness. Even the entrance of the cave just now could not be seen. Her face was a little pale. She estimated in her heart that from the entrance of the cave to here, it was probably equivalent to walking down from the ground. And the vertical height was about 100 feet. This discovery surprised White Lotus a little, because a tunnel of such a scale in front of them must have consumed a lot of manpower and material resources, and it was almost impossible for an ordinary cultivator to do it. Especially in this busy street, if someone found out or complained about the indiscriminate harvesting and digging, they would often look for the Heavenly Dragon Mountain's true immortal alliance to uphold justice. What was Rui Xiaotian's background and identity? After walking for a while, the ground under their feet suddenly leveled out. Lu Chen whispered, we are underground. As he said this, he raised the torch in his hand and began to illuminate the side. As the torch was raised high, the fire burned and gradually illuminated the surroundings. A moment later, Lu Chen and White Lotus suddenly exclaimed at almost the same time, and exclaimed at the same time. With the help of the fire, Lu Chen and White Lotus saw where they were at the same time, as well as some of the surrounding areas. On the stone steps they came down just now, they could see that the stone steps and the stone walls next to them were almost newly built by outsiders. They were simple and meaningless. However, as they raised their torches, Lu Chen and Bai Lian suddenly realized that they had walked into a large underground passageway that was paved with huge stones. There were also some strange symbols carved into the walls on both sides, or perhaps it was more accurate to say that they were writing markings or something like that. Those characters, markings, and talisman inscriptions all looked very ancient. Even now, perhaps no one knew the meaning behind them. They did not understand why the predecessors had carved these things in this underground place. However, although they did not understand these words and marks, they still thought of something else from these things. Lu Chen did not say anything, but White Lotus suddenly said in a deep voice, the relic, this is a part of the underground relic back then. Mount Tianlong was a spiritual mountain blessed on the Four-River Plain. The land on and below the mountain were fertile and rich in spiritual energy. Perhaps there had been humans living here since a long time ago in ancient times. As for those ancient tribes, they lived here for a very long period of time before disappearing without a trace. Therefore, the relic had slowly become a ubiquitous place in the immortal city. A long time ago, this large-scale relic had been famous all over the world, but it was sealed by powerful humans in the following days. And today, Lu Chun and White Lotus had only casually opened the door under the peach blossom tree and actually found this secret passage. Who knew that it was deep underground and was actually connected to the relic? Lu Chun quietly looked at the situation in the surrounding passage. His eyes moved slightly, and after a moment he suddenly pulled White Lotus and walked forward at the same time, saying, "Let's go take a look." Chapter 419. The Immortal City was where the headquarters of Zhengxianmeng was located. It was also known as the most prosperous city in the world. Other than the fact that there were as many people as ants and cultivators as many as dogs, the most famous thing was that there were many ruins left from ancient times in this huge city without city walls. Among them, the most famous and eye-catching were, of course, the statues of the four great mythological beasts of the East, West, South, and North. To this day, there was still not a fifth huge statue that could compare to the statues of the four great mythological beasts. It was said that in the previous generation of Zhengxianmeng, there was a great spiritual master who was proficient in this field who lived in the Immortal City for 70 years just to study these ruins. Then, when he was dying, he left behind a shocking discovery. Not many people in the world knew what this discovery was, because it was said that only a few divine transformation realm perfected cultivators of the previous generation of Zhengxianmeng were present at that time. And when that spiritual master passed away, people only saw those divine transformation realm perfected cultivators walk out of the room with solemn expressions. Then Zhengxianmeng buried that spiritual master with the highest ceremony. But from then on, no one ever heard of this matter again. And none of those divine transformation stage perfected monarchs ever mentioned anything about it again. This was a legend that was widely spread among the people of the Immortal City, and even among the cultivators of the vast land of the Divine Land. It had not been extinguished for many years, and on this basis, there were also all kinds of guesses, variations, and even all kinds of stories. In the end, it was because those powerful perfected cultivators of Zhengxianmeng suddenly took action many years ago. They valiantly and forcefully sealed the ancient ruins under the Immortal City. At the same time, they also buried the legend of those treasures that had been passed down for thousands of years in people's imagination. To this day, there were still countless people yearning for the mysterious and illusory treasures under the Immortal City. However, the seal back then was cast by a few perfected lords of the divine transformation realm at their peak. The power was simply unimaginable. At least, after so many years, no one was able to take a peek at the true core secret of the underground relic. These things were well known in the human cultivation world, and were not secrets. Therefore, when Lu Chun and White Lotus walked into the tunnel that looked like an ancient relic, they almost thought of these things at the same time. The patterns on the wall were obscure and distorted. At first glance, Lu Chun felt that they were somewhat similar to the totem patterns of the barbarians in the southern wilderness. But after careful observation, he found that there were many obvious differences between the two. At least for the time being, Lu Chun did not sense any dark power similar to the barbarian totem from the runes on the walls. The torch was still burning. White Lotus and Lu Chun's footsteps echoed in the wide passage. Looking at the neat stones on both sides, they walked forward for about 5 or 6 zhang. Suddenly, they stopped at the same time. The darkness in the tunnel was temporarily dispelled by the fire, but the tunnel in front of them came to an abrupt end. It looked like a large pile of rubble had collapsed from the dome, directly blocking the tunnel. There was no path ahead. Moreover, all the signs looked like a dead end. White Lotus let out a low and slightly disappointed cry, saying, "What's going on? It's blocked." Lu Chun walked forward, waved the torch in his hand and carefully looked at the pile of rubble in front of him. Very soon he found that it was tightly blocked, not even a gap. Moreover, there were layers upon layers of rubble in front of them. He was afraid that in the depths of this tunnel, the number of stones that had collapsed was not just a few, so there was no possibility of going further. He sighed, turned around and said to White Lotus, "This is probably a corner at the edge of the underground ruins of the Immortal City. There are still some remnants outside the sealing spell, but it seems that we can't go further in." White Lotus nodded. Obviously, although she was not old, she had long known about the legend of the ancient ruins of the Immortal City. However, Only the cultivators in the cultivation world would not be interested in the most mysterious, most magnificent and most precious treasure in the world. Therefore, her face also showed a little regret. She muttered, as if she was a little angry and complained like a little girl, saying, "Ai, if only we could go in and take a look." Lu Chen smiled and first gestured for her to go back together. At the same time he said, "This tunnel was left behind by the mysterious butcher. Obviously he must have been here before. If he had found anything, he would have gone in long ago." White Lotus shrugged. It seemed that she did not have much objection to what Lu Chen said. However, perhaps she was still a little displeased with the man beside her, or perhaps she was not convinced, so she casually replied, "That's not necessarily true. Maybe he's not as smart as us?" Lu Chen laughed and said, "That's right. But actually, the treasure in the ancient ruins is only a legend. No one knows what is actually inside. If after you go in, you don't find the treasure, and suddenly a large group of vicious and strange monsters suddenly jump out and directly eat a white and beautiful little girl like you, it would be too late for you to cry at that time." "Imph." White Lotus snorted. There was a look of dissatisfaction on her face. She said, "The legend of the ancient ruins has been around for so many years. You have never entered it before. How can you say that it's fake?" Lu Chen waved his hand and said, "I didn't say that it's fake. I just feel that there are many loopholes in the story. It doesn't make sense. There are many problems." White Lotus's eyebrows twitched. She was a little more curious. She said, "Oh, tell me." Lu Chen glanced at her, turned around and walked forward. He said, "I'm too lazy to say." "You." White Lotus was instantly angered. She fiercely clenched her teeth and chased after Lu Chen and grabbed his sleeve. She said angrily, "Tell me clearly. I'm too lazy to say anything. I think you're dissatisfied with me." "Of course I'm dissatisfied with you," Lu Chen said. White Lotus was stunned again. It seemed that she didn't expect this man to be so direct and ruthless. After a moment of daze, the expression on her face eased a little. There was even a strange light in her eyes. She looked at Lu Chen for a moment and softened her voice. She said, "You're such a strange person. All right then. What exactly do you have that you're dissatisfied with? Can you tell me?" "You wanted to kill my dog in the past," Lu Chen said. White Lotus frowned and said, "It's just a useless dog. Is it worth making a fuss about?" Lu Chen said seriously, "Although Atsu is lazy, ugly and gluttonous, it's not useless." White Lotus waved her hand impatiently and said, all right. Anyway, it's your dog. It has nothing to do with me. But that was a few years ago. Now that I've met you, I didn't come up to fight and kill that dog. As a man, don't be so narrow-minded." Lu Chen sneered and said, "Miss, you're used to being arrogant. You bullied others in the past, and now you can casually call others to let it go? Even if it's a dog, it's still my dog. I'm not happy." White Lotus was furious. She spat and said angrily, "Who do you think you are? How dare you talk to me like this? Isn't it just a dog? I killed it when I wanted to. What do you want? Also, do you think I still have to rely on you? Get lost." After saying that, she turned around and strode forward, leaving Lu Chen alone. Lu Chen looked at her back as she walked into the darkness and shouted, "Do you want a torch? Save the torch and burn yourself to death." White Lotus shouted at the last moment before she walked into the darkness. Then she could no longer be seen. Lu Chen looked at the darkness. After a moment of silence, he suddenly shook his head and slowly turned around. However, he turned his head to look in the direction of the pile of rocks that had blocked his path. His eyes slightly narrowed. Chapter 420. Bang. A muffled sound suddenly came from the passage left behind by the ancient ruins. The torch in Lu Chen's hand suddenly fell from his hand and fell to the ground without warning. It bounced a few times and rolled a short distance to the side. The flame was still burning, but it quickly became smaller during the rolling period, gradually becoming a weak flame, until finally, after twisting a few times, it quietly extinguished. Darkness returned here again. Lu Chen stood in the ancient underground passage without any light and closed his eyes. as if he was perceiving something. After a while he slowly opened his eyes again, but at this time, there was a faint black flame slowly burning in the depths of his pupils. He also turned around and walked into the passage. The darkness covered all the routes, but Lu Chen seemed to be able to see everything in the darkness. Without any hesitation, he walked steadily and firmly, and then once again returned to the passage blocked by stones. He stretched out his hand in the darkness and touched the huge cold and hard stones. The rough feeling came from his fingertips, and then came the uneven and cracked stone gaps. He carefully groped, and no one knew what he felt. Behind him, the darkness also seemed to be silent, silently surrounding his figure, as if staring at what this strange figure was doing. Bai Lian jumped out from the tunnel with an angry look on her face. She cursed under her breath, but it seemed like she was still angry. She kicked a broken piece of wood in the air, and flew in an arc before hitting a pillar on the opposite side of the corridor. Then it fell to the ground. Bai Lian looked at Bai Lian and 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 Bai Lian. White Lotus, who was usually quiet and cold like a little fairy, had long lost her interest in pretending at the moment. She angrily paced back and forth a few times on the side of the tunnel. The more she thought about it, the more annoyed she became. Suddenly she spat at the bottom of the tunnel and said, "Stinky man, what are you proud of? If it weren't for that damn baldy Tianlan who insisted that I come to help you, do you think I would be willing to come? Ever since Master died, the people I've met are getting weirder and weirder." After cursing for a while, White Lotus's anger subsided a little, but her expression was still ugly. She didn't care about anything else. With a cold snort, she turned around and walked out. It seemed that her temper had flared up and she didn't care about anything else. She didn't want to stay here any longer, and she didn't want to see Lu Chen again. He quickly walked past the small courtyard, arrived at the corridor, and then walked towards the main door. The house behind him was quiet, only a gust of spring wind blowing from afar, rustling the blooming peach trees, adding a little quiet rustling to the quiet time here. White Lotus's footsteps slowed down. When she reached the door, she stopped. For some reason, she didn't reach out to open the door. Her beautiful and delicate brows slightly furrowed, and the anger on her face unknowingly dissipated. Instead, she revealed a puzzled expression. "Something's not right," White Lotus muttered to herself. After a while she slowly turned around. Her eyes were clear and bright, and with a somewhat thoughtful expression, she stared at the entrance of the tunnel under the peach tree in the courtyard. The pitch-black darkness covered Lu Chen's figure, and the black flame in his eyes didn't leak out at all, allowing the black fire in his eyes to gradually grow bigger and bigger. His hand had been groping on the wall of ruins formed by the rubble, until his palm suddenly touched a flat broken stone. It was an inconspicuous place among the rubble, but after groping in the dark for a long time, Lu Chen almost immediately felt that this place was different. This stone had a nearly round surface and a smooth surface in sharp contrast to the rough surface of the surrounding rubble. It gave people the feeling that it was part of a pillar, or something made of a particularly smooth stone a long time ago. The black fire in his eyes flickered, as if he was a little hesitant at that moment, but after a while, Lu Chen lowered his head, but placed one side of his cheek and ear on this round stone. A cold feeling instantly seeped into his face, causing Lu Chen to frown. But he didn't retreat, and instead slightly narrowed his eyes, carefully listening to something. Behind that stone, what was it? What was in the depths of this ancient ruin? Perhaps there was nothing. Other than the cold feeling seeping out from the stone, he didn't feel anything out of the ordinary. Behind this cold stone, perhaps there were even more empty stone caves. There was no movement, no sound, everything seemed to be deathly silent. Lu Chen silently waited for a while, but still didn't find anything. He could only prepare to get up, but at this moment within his chest his heart suddenly jumped. If there was light at this moment he could clearly see that in this man's eyes, the two balls of black fire, at that moment, seemed to be startled by a sudden gust of wind, twisting and distorting, only returning to normal after a while. Lu Chen's eyes suddenly lit up. As if he felt something, he couldn't help but stretch out his finger to knock on the surface of the stone twice. Pa, pa. The sounds were low and clear, but this time, there was no response. It was as if the sudden palpitation he felt was just an illusion in the darkness. Lu Chen tried a few times, but there was no reaction. In the end, Lu Chen was finally at his wit's end, and slowly stood up. Until now, he still couldn't confirm whether there was anything strange behind this wall of ruins. And if there was, what strange thing would it be? But just now, the power behind the distant stone wall, that suddenly resonated with the power of the black fire in his body, made him faintly feel that there seemed to be some secret hidden here. Yes, from the beginning until the end, the ancient words and talisman markings on the walls didn't affect him in the slightest. Instead, it was the mysterious thing behind the wall of ruins that aroused his interest. But even so, at this moment, he seemed to have walked into a dead end. Thinking about it, those deity transformation stage true monarchs all had earth-shattering magical powers, casting spells to seal these ruins for hundreds of years without any problems. Of course, it was impossible for them to be shaken like him. Perhaps there was nothing at all, and it was just a misunderstanding. Lu Chen sighed, straightened his body, and wanted to leave, but after a moment of thought, he casually stretched out his fingers, and two black flames surged out from his fingertips, carrying a trace of indescribable and strange aura. And just like that, he knocked on the stone twice. Papa! Like a sudden knock on the door in a quiet afternoon. It echoed in this passage. There was no reaction. Lu Chen turned around, walked into the darkness, and quickly disappeared. After an unknown amount of time, suddenly in this darkness, in a certain corner of the wall of ruins on a certain stone, a soft and weak voice suddenly sounded. Papa! Papa! Chapter 421. White Lotus stared at the entrance of the tunnel under the blossoming peach tree for a while, her expression fluctuating, but the initial anger had completely disappeared, leaving behind only a pondering expression. After a while, she suddenly straightened her expression, as if she had made up her mind. She strode towards the entrance. Just that, when she reached the entrance, she suddenly heard a burst of footsteps below. A moment later, Lu Chen's figure walked out from the darkness, following the stone steps to the ground. A breeze blew, white petals with a tinge of pink floated down from the tree, landing on their shoulders and lapels. They looked at each other. Lu Chen was the first to speak. I thought you had already left. White Lotus looked at his eyes. The corner of her eyes swept over the black hole on the ground. After a moment of silence, she asked, Why did you take so long to come up? The road was too dark, not easy to walk. White Lotus glanced at his palm, said, Where is your torch? Oh, I burned it halfway and suddenly ran out of fire, so I had to throw it down there. Lu Chen said. The corner of White Lotus's mouth slightly twitched, but she did not say anything more. After a while, she turned around, silently walked to the main door, opened the door and walked out. What we are doing now, do you really understand in your heart? Deep in the alley of Shimaqiao, Old Ma and Lu Chen sat on the grass in the courtyard, looking at the already dark sky. Behind the faint dark clouds were even more twinkling stars, and then suddenly asked Lu Chen this question. It was rare that Atsu did not eat meat in big mouthfuls, nor did it sleep soundly, only quietly lying beside Lu Chen. Probably it also felt that this was a rare time to spend with Lu Chen, at least for the past few days. Lu Chen used his hand to gently stroke the fur on top of Atsu's head, faintly said, Of course I know. Even though I didn't like that damn Baldy, we were still on the same page when it came to dealing with the devil cult. He came up with a plan, and I thought it might work, so I helped him do it. Old Ma glanced at him, sighed, and said nothing. Lu Chen's hand moved from Atsu's head to its stomach. After the familiar warm feeling, he felt that Atsu seemed to have grown fatter than before. It was no wonder. He ate, drank, and slept like a pig every day. No matter what, he would become fat. He patted Atsu's stomach lightly and said, He said that to destroy the source of belief of the devil cult, the first thing we have to do is to find the few divine objects in their hands. Some of the divine objects must be in the immortal city. So, what we have to do now is to find those rats hiding in the dark corners of this city, right? Old Ma frowned and said, But we found a few people, and none of them seem to have anything to do with the devil cult. Lu Chen shook his hand and said, That's not right. What do you mean? It's not that they have nothing to do with the devil cult. It's that we haven't found any evidence of them having anything to do with the devil cult. Among these people, some of their whereabouts are unknown, and some of them were killed before we could find them. We still don't know what secrets they have behind them. After a pause, Lu Chen glanced at Old Ma and said, "Did you go to Fuyunji to ask about this?" Old Ma nodded and said, "I've talked to Hall Master Shuiying." She admitted that she was the one who submitted the list to Supreme Tianlan, but she also said that there are no traitors among her subordinates. At least, most of them are loyal and reliable people. However, she will investigate this matter in private. Speaking of this, Old Ma hesitated and said, "Why don't you ask him the next time you see him?" "It's no use," Lu Chen said straightforwardly. "What kind of person is that damn Baldy? He has so many big and small things in his hands all day long. It's impossible for him to check this list one by one. At most, he will ask his subordinates to do it. It's almost the same as asking us to do things for him. But in Fuyunji, someone must have leaked the secret." Old Ma snorted as if he had already expected this. He said, "We've already talked about this a few years ago. The true Immortal Alliance's halls are like sieves now. They're leaking like crazy. I thought it would be better in Fuyunji, but now it looks like it's almost the same." Lu Chen smiled and said, "Anyway, we still have to do what we have to do. Since Rui Xiaotian ran away and we can't find him, let's continue to look for the people behind him." Old Ma nodded. After a moment of silence, he suddenly said, "By the way, I got some information about the woman you asked me to investigate the other day." Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and said, "Who is she? What's her background?" Old Ma said, "There is indeed a woman named Song Wenji in the Heavenly Law Hall of the Immortal Allies. She has a powerful background. She is the adopted daughter of the highly respected Immortal Tiehu." Lu Chen was stunned and said, "The adopted daughter of Immortal Tiehu?" Old Ma nodded and said, "Yes. Because Immortal Tiehu has no children, he values his only adopted daughter very much and tries to cultivate her. It can be said that she is one of the most popular young people in the Heavenly Law Hall." Lu Chen thought for a moment and suddenly laughed. He said, "It seems that Immortal Tiehu doesn't like that damn Baldy." Old Ma also smiled and said, "That's true. That lord has indeed disliked us for many years." Lu Chen waved his hand and said with a trace of laziness, "Who cares? Let these big shots fight for these trivial matters. We just need to do our own things." He put his hands under his head and closed his eyes. He mumbled something. Old Ma didn't hear it clearly and asked, "What did you say?" Lu Chen closed his eyes and said, "I hope the person we are looking for tomorrow is still alive." In the spring of this year, the weather in the immortal city where Zhengxianmeng was located was pleasant. Hundreds of flowers were in full bloom. Not only peach blossoms, but also countless beautiful flowers bloomed in this season, decorating the city extraordinarily beautiful. And at this time, in Zhengxianmeng, which had always been calm, at least on the surface for many years, a piece of strange news suddenly came out. The 5 devils of the Blood-Wing sect of East Sea that Zhengxianmeng had suppressed a while ago had suddenly abandoned the darkness and entered the light. All of them had been absorbed by Zhengxianmeng. However, among them, 2 first surrendered to Immortal Tianlan, while the other 3 had inexplicably joined the Heavenly Law Hall of another deity stage Immortal Tiehu. For a moment, everyone inside and outside Zhengxianmeng cast sidelong glances at each other. There seemed to be some faint tension between these 2 big shots who stood at the peak of the human cultivation world. And in the surging undercurrents, there was another matter that was not so obvious, although perhaps this matter itself was much more important. Immortal Guyu, another big shot who was in charge of the Starry Hall in Zhengxianmeng, suddenly sent a secret letter to the other 5 deity stage immortals in Zhengxianmeng one day, inviting them to the Starry Hall for a discussion. It had been many, many years since all 6 deity stage immortals in Zhengxianmeng had gathered together. Chapter 422. When night fell, it was quiet both inside and outside the bedroom. The window opposite the bed was half open, and a faint beam of starlight shone in from outside, falling into the dark room. Lu Chen and the black dog lay down, but they were not asleep yet. Because Atsu was growing bigger and bigger, A normal bed could no longer accommodate it to sleep with Lu Qin. Therefore, Atsu had been sleeping on the ground these days. But even on the ground, Atsu slept close to the bed. Its huge body was already higher than the edge of the bed, so Lu Qin could easily touch its body and head if he stretched out his hand. Now Lu Qin gently placed one hand on Atsu's back, lying on his side. After a long silence in the dark, he suddenly said, "Atsu, it seems that the message that your serious dad asked me to pass on is not going to be easy." Atsu raised its head, and its huge head immediately went over the edge of the bed. Its two bright and deep eyes glanced at Lu Qin. Deep in the depths of its eyes was the faint green light that would appear whenever it was in the dark. To be honest, the current Atsu, no matter how one looked at it, was no longer the pathetic and weak mud of the past. Its body was abnormally tall and strong. Its fangs were as sharp as knives, and the claws on its forelimbs could even cut through iron. When its head appeared beside the bed, it looked more like an extremely terrifying monster, making people feel a kind of soul-stirring fear. However, of course Lu Qin was not afraid of Atsu. He kept patting Atsu's head with his hand, and the Atsu, which seemed to be much stronger than this human, was also very close to Lu Qin. It seemed to enjoy his touch, rubbing its head against his palm from time to time, and occasionally sticking out its tongue to lick him. Unlike Atsu's dad in the Great Snow Mountain, Lu Qin could not speak the human language even though Atsu looked very strong and fierce. Therefore, most of the time, Lu Qin could only talk to himself. But it seemed that he was already used to it. Therefore, after a while, Lu Qin continued talking to himself. He did not wait for Atsu's reply, or any other reaction. He said, "That old man Taihu's status is too high. It's really difficult for us to meet him. If we go to him honestly, we'll definitely be thrown out. But if we use the identity of the dead Baldi to meet him, of course, we can't do that either. There'll be too many troubles in the future." Atsu's head shrank a little, and then it lay down on its two front legs. With the help of the faint starlight, the black dog's expression did not change at all, as if what Lu Qin said had nothing to do with it, or the task that its father Sirius had instructed it to do in the past had nothing to do with it. Lu Qin also saw Atsu's reaction, and he could not help but laugh. He scolded, and then said with a smile, This is something that your old man has instructed you to do. Why don't you care at all?" Atsu yawned lazily, as if it was too lazy to even bark. Lu Qin did not care about it. After a moment of silence, he said slowly, "Actually, there's another layer of trouble in this matter. Perhaps it's even more troublesome than the previous two problems." He glanced at Atsu, lowered his voice and said, "Your father Sirius asked me to pass on a message, to ask that old man Taihu to return the leaf that he borrowed years ago. I've thought about this sentence many times, and I've always felt that it's not quite right. Taihu is a deity transformation stage true monarch, and Sirius is an ancient species, one of the most powerful and terrifying giant beasts in the world. So what kind of leaf was it that was worth them making a deal? And after so many years, Sirius still refused to give up, and even sent people to pursue it." Lu Qin sighed and said to Atsu, "Why do I have a feeling that maybe it wasn't just borrowing that year?" Atsu let out a low cry, and for a moment, no one knew what it meant. Lu Qin stroked its head, thought for a moment, and said, "If that thing is really that important, or if that old man Taihu has a bad heart and doesn't want to return it, do you think he'll directly slap me to death if I go up to him?" Atsu ignored him, and looked a little sleepy, as if it was about to fall asleep. Lu Qin glanced at it, shook his head, and scolded jokingly. He turned over and lay flat on the bed. After a moment of silence, he muttered to himself, "Forget it, let's put this matter off for now, and see if there's a suitable opportunity in the future. Anyway, Sirius didn't give me any deadline." He closed his eyes, and the corner of his mouth twitched slightly, as if he was about to fall asleep. But after a while, he softly muttered to himself, "Leaf? In this world, there's a leaf that can attract the attention of a deity transformation stage true monarch? Perhaps there's only one." His voice gradually faded, and gradually disappeared into the darkness. He didn't know if it was because Lu Qin had pissed her off that day, but White Lotus hadn't come looking for him for the past few days. Although Lu Qin couldn't ask for more, he was still a little surprised, because according to his understanding of White Lotus, she should not be such an irritable and impulsive person. However, without White Lotus, it was certainly more convenient for Lu Chun and Old Ma to act, even if White Lotus was now a trusted follower of Supreme Tianlan. However, neither Lu Chun nor Old Ma really or openly discussed this matter, but they had always ignored or disapproved of the rumor that Supreme Tianlan would accept White Lotus as his personal disciple. Today they were going out again. As usual, Lu Chun went to the warehouse, grabbed a large piece of demon beast meat, and threw it to Atsu. Atsu happily picked it up, ran to the grass, and gnawed on it. Then Lu Chun and Old Ma left. Before going out, Lu Chun looked back and saw that Atsu was lying in the grass eating meat happily as usual. Logically speaking, after it finished eating this piece of superior demon beast meat, it should go back to its room to sleep. Lu Chun closed the door with a smile, and then walked forward with Old Ma. Today was the day they went to find the new person on the list. Behind them, the house was getting farther and farther away. In the small courtyard of the house, it was very quiet inside and outside. The only sound was probably the harsh sound of meat chewing in this quiet atmosphere. Atsu obviously didn't feel anything about the atmosphere or the scenery. It just wanted to eat the delicious meat in front of its mouth. After an unknown period of time, a figure suddenly landed lightly from midair and stood in the courtyard. Atsu stood up almost immediately and let out a low roar. The hair on its back stood up, and its fierce and terrifying posture was like that of a ferocious demon beast, causing people to be intimidated. However, after a moment, the roar suddenly stopped. Atsu tilted its head and looked at the figure in front of it. A trace of surprise appeared in its eyes. It was a young girl dressed in white. Her appearance was exceptionally beautiful. It was White Lotus. She walked forward, looked at Atsu, smiled, and even waved her hand, saying to Atsu, "Long time no see, Atsu." Of course, it was impossible for Atsu and this girl to not have seen each other for a long time. At the very least, they had met outside the immortal city. However, although Atsu was now fierce and terrifying, and was much taller than White Lotus when standing up, it still had some fear towards White Lotus. It stood up and let out a low roar. Its pair of huge eyes stared straight at White Lotus, as if it didn't dare to relax at all. On the contrary, White Lotus looked much more relaxed. She first looked around, then nodded and said, "It's a good place to live." She then looked at the piece of demon beast meat in front of Atsu and frowned slightly. Then she smiled and said, "Eating so well, Lu Chun really cares about you." Atsu didn't have any reaction. White Lotus just looked at Atsu and suddenly extended a hand to wave at it. Then, she smiled warmly and said, "Atsu, come here. I'll take you to a very fun place." Chapter 423. I heard that there has been some movement on Mount Tianlong recently? Lu Chun asked Old Ma while walking on the street. Old Ma shook his head and said, "It's not really a movement. It's just that the master of the Starry Temple, Guyu, suddenly sent a secret letter to the other 5 perfected immortals. No one knows what the content is, but I heard that the other 5 perfected immortals have agreed to go." Lu Chun thought for a while and said, "I remember that they haven't had a gathering like this for a long time, right?" "Yes, it's been many years," Old Ma said. "I also don't remember seeing them gather together." Lu Chun was silent for a while, and there was a glimmer in the depths of his eyes. Then he asked Old Ma, "Don't you think it's a little strange? The true Immortal Alliance is so big, but it's all under the control of the 6 of them. To put it bluntly, it's not an exaggeration to say that the entire human cultivation world is under their control. But why haven't they gathered to discuss anything for so many years?" Old Ma touched his chin, as if he was a little speechless about this. After a while he said, "Maybe the 6 perfected immortals think that they can control the world without a gathering?" Towards the end, he seemed to feel that what he said was a little unreasonable. He could only smile and shake his head, saying, "Well, who knows? Anyway, at the level of perfected immortals of Huashan realm, they are half human and half god, almost the same as immortals. So it's different from what we think." Lu Chun said expressionlessly, "Perfected immortals of Huashan realm are also human." Old Ma was shocked and turned to look at him. only to see that Luchin was looking straight ahead without any expression on his face, as if what he said just now was just a casual remark. He hesitated for a while, as if he wanted to say something, but in the end he stopped and shook his head without saying anything. At this moment, Luchin suddenly asked him again, "Do you know when the gathering of those old men is scheduled?" Old Ma said, "Oh, it's not a secret. It should be today. After all, this is the headquarters of Zhengxianmeng on Mount Celestial Dragon, so there's nothing to be afraid of. Moreover, the 6 of them are all big shots with a slight move, so it's hard for them to escape the eyes and ears of others." Luchin grunted. After a moment of silence, he suddenly smiled and said to Old Ma, "To be honest, this is a rare scene. Most people in the world would find it extremely difficult to meet even one deity transformation perfected monarch in their lifetime, let alone 6 of them." Old Ma laughed and nodded. "That's true. Now that you mention it, I also want to watch from the starry hall." Luchin didn't say anything and smiled. He looked up and saw that on this day, the sun had just risen, and the rays of light were shining down from the sky. The huge white tiger statue occupied the city, looking down at the people, bathed in the golden light, looking unusually majestic. For some reason, Luchin always had a feeling that the eyes of the white tiger statue seemed to be staring at him from afar. In the courtyard of the house deep in the alley of Horse Washing Bridge, White Lotus's beautiful and refined face had a smile. She looked harmless and incomparably beautiful. Anyone who saw her would have a feeling of love and adoration. Except for the black dog in front of her. The black dog seemed to be very vigilant towards this beautiful girl. Although for some reason, it didn't make any aggressive moves, but it was obvious that Atsu didn't have any intention of being close to White Lotus. It slowly stood up and stared at White Lotus. Its head and shoulders were slightly tilted down, looking like a beast about to pounce on its prey. It could be said that it was defending itself, but it also had a hint of warning in it. White Lotus waited in place for a while. She saw that the huge black dog was still vigilantly looking at her, as if it was facing a great enemy. It didn't have the slightest intention of being obedient. The corner of her mouth twitched, as if she was secretly gritting her teeth. Then she snorted and said, "I say, do you really have to go so far? It's been a few years since that incident on Kunlun Mountain. Even your master didn't shout to kill me all day long. You little bastard. You actually bear a grudge?" Atsu stared at her. Although it couldn't speak, it made a low growl from its throat. At the same time, its sharp white fangs slowly opened and closed, as if it was still showing off. White Lotus rubbed the space between her eyebrows with her fingers. She seemed to be a little annoyed. She looked at the ground from the corner of her eyes and saw the half-eaten demon beast meat on the ground. She sighed and said, "Why don't you come with me and do me a favor? I'll give you better demon beast meat later. What do you think?" Atsu blinked and snorted. It had an uninterested look on its face. If it was described in human terms, it would probably be snorting disdainfully. White Lotus was taken aback. She seemed to have a whole new level of respect for this dog. She said in surprise, "You're not greedy anymore?" Atsu glanced at her, and then looked at a place outside the courtyard. There was a large room called the warehouse. It had followed Luchin in there. The demon beast meat filled the room like a small mountain. Trying to cheat a dog with this kind of demon beast meat? That's not going to work. Atsu glanced at the demon beast meat on the ground. It seemed that it didn't want to pay attention to this woman. It was ready to continue eating its meal. Pa! There was a muffled sound as Bai Lian threw a moderate-sized rock at Atsu. The rock bounced a few times on the grass in the courtyard and rolled for a while before stopping not far from Atu's head. Atu was startled and his body shrank back a little. He then immediately bared his teeth at White Lotus and made a fierce face. It looked as if he was saying, "If you provoke me again, don't blame me for eating you up." To be honest, when paired with his ridiculously tall body, it really was a little scary. However, White Lotus obviously didn't have much fear of this black dog. She just waved her hand indifferently, then pointed at the stone on the ground and said, don't rush, look at that thing." Roar. Atsu stared at White Lotus warily. After a while, its pair of dog eyes glanced down. It saw that the stone on the ground was about the size of a palm. One side was flat, but the other side was uneven and full of potholes. At this moment, the flat side was upside down on the ground, and it looked like it was dug out from somewhere. Atsu took a few glances and found nothing unusual. Just when it was about to raise its head and get angry at White Lotus, it saw that White Lotus waved her hand impatiently and said, "Turn it over, turn it over." Atsu hesitated for a moment, stretched out a dog paw to lift the stone, and turned it over. Suddenly, its eyes focused on the stone, and for a moment, it couldn't move its eyes away. From the moment it turned the stone over, White Lotus had been staring at Atsu's expression. At this moment, she finally showed a happy expression. She couldn't help but gently clench her fist, took 2 steps forward and said, "How is it? Does it look familiar?" Atsu stared at the stone without saying a word. On the flat side of the stone, there was a complicated and twisted strange picture. The pattern seemed to be somewhat similar to the totem of the barbarians in the far south. White Lotus squatted down not far in front of it. Atsu raised its head and looked at her with a puzzled expression. White Lotus pointed at the stone and said to Atsu, "I dug this thing out from the wall of a place. Well, although it is an ancient relic, who cares? As long as I am happy, it is fine. You are interested in this thing, right? Isn't the secret method of blood feeding something from the barbarians?" Atsu was silent for a moment and suddenly whispered twice. It didn't sound like there was any hostility anymore. White Lotus smiled, seemed to be very satisfied, and also a little proud. She even stretched out her hand to try to touch Atsu's head. Atsu dodged, but in the end it didn't retreat. White Lotus nodded and said, "Well, since you are also interested in these things, let's go and have a look together." And she stood up, and her eyes flashed slightly. She whispered, "Also help me to carefully search for the secret in that hole." Chapter 424. Do you think we'll alert the enemy this time? Old Ma asked Lu Chun. Lu Chun looked at him and said, "What do you mean?" "The butcher who escaped." Old Ma said, "We went there but we didn't catch him. Instead, we let him escape. Until now, we still don't know where he is. If that guy really has something to do with the devil sect, it'll be difficult." Lu Chun was silent for a while, then said, "It's also possible that he has nothing to do with the devil sect. At least, I carefully searched the meat shop inside and out, and didn't find anything related to the devil sect." Old Ma said, "Could it be that he's also a veteran, so everything is very clean and secretive?" Lu Chun shook his head slightly, and didn't answer his question. Instead, he changed the topic and said, "It's that Song Wenji's fault. If she didn't suddenly interfere, and I was the one who set it up, the two of us would have worked together, and that person wouldn't have been able to escape." Old Ma shrugged his shoulders, and didn't say anything. Lu Chun said, "How's the hunting for the butcher going?" Old Ma said, "I've already told the situation to Fuyunji. Hall leader Shuang has also ordered to track down that person. With their strength, it's still possible to catch that guy." Lu Chun nodded and said, "That's good." As they spoke, they had already passed the long street, and turned into a relatively quiet street. Finally, they stopped in front of a very ordinary-looking tavern. One is a gardener, the other is a butcher. What is this person now? Old Ma looked at the tavern with some emotion, and his expression was somewhat complicated. Perhaps he was thinking of a tavern like this a long time ago. "A chef," Lu Chun said to him, and then stepped into the tavern. After thousands of years of development, Zhangxianmeng had already occupied the peak of the human cultivation world in the vast land of the Divine Land, and had stayed there for a long time. As everyone knew, there was never a selfless saint in the world. Even if there was, it was a legend that lived in people's imagination, passed down from generation to generation, respected by everyone, and no one would learn it. Even if there was a Huashan deity whose cultivation was unbelievably high, and many people in the world regarded them as immortals, in the end, they were just people. The true immortal alliance ruled the cultivation world half in the light and half in the dark. Naturally, there were unimaginably huge benefits. Therefore, there were also countless people fighting in the true immortal alliance, both in the light and in the dark. Thus, there were countless large and small factions. However, in the cultivation world, the strong were respected. All the factions, in the end, The most prominent one was still the mountain forces led by the 6 Huashan deity cultivators. Among the big and small mountain forces in Zhengxianmeng, the Starry Hall was a very aloof, or it could be said that it was a very low-key faction. Basically, in most of the conflicts for interests in Zhengxianmeng, people from the Starry Hall faction could not be seen. A long time ago in ancient times, this would probably be praised as a kind of sage-like and immortal style. But in this era where all living beings were bustling with activity, who didn't want fame and who didn't want profit? So the Starry Hall, which was once prominent in the early years, was now no longer as glorious as it was in the past. But in any case, no matter how low-key it was, there was still a Guyu deity in the Starry Hall. Such a strong person was enough to be respected, so people did not say the word low-key. When mentioning the Starry Hall, it was said that people in this place were obsessed with cultivation, and were very detached from the interests of mortals. It was just that after being low-key or aloof for so many years, recently the Starry Hall suddenly made a move, which shocked many people in the Immortal Allies. After so many years, the 6 Huashan deity cultivators of Zhengxianmeng were actually invited to a gathering from this place, which was really unexpected. There was almost no one in the world who would not give face to a Huashan deity cultivator. The only person who had the confidence to do so was probably also a Huashan deity cultivator. But on this day, it was clear that the other 5 Huashan deity cultivators of Zhengxianmeng were very respectful to the Guyu deity cultivator of the Starry Hall. They all put down the important things at hand and the trivial things that piled up like a mountain, and found time to come to the Starry Hall. The Starry Hall was an unusually majestic and spacious hall. It looked even taller than a small hill. In addition to its majestic appearance, there was a dazzling star map engraved on the dome of the Starry Hall, which was filled with countless stars. Every time night came, the lights in the hall would be extinguished, and the stars carved with strange gems would light up one by one, decorating the hall with light, and it was very beautiful. This was a very famous wonder in the main hall of Zhengxianmeng, but it was very difficult for ordinary people to see. Even for Huashan deity cultivators, because of their status, they usually would not come here, so in fact, they had not seen it many times. Needless to say, when they came this time, it was in the daytime. When the 6 great Huashan deity cultivators gathered to discuss matters, all the disciples, servants, and servants of the Starry Hall were chased out, and all the attendants and disciples brought by the other 5 Huashan deity cultivators were also told to wait outside the hall. In the entire huge hall, only the 6 of them remained inside. Unlike most people's imaginations of the gathering of the 6 great Huashan deity cultivators, the sky changing color, and thunder and lightning, the 6 great figures who came to the Starry Hall at this moment were not dressed solemnly, and their faces were cold. They were each sitting on a high chair, like gods looking down on the world from high above. On the contrary, the 6 people in the hall were directly sitting on the ground under the starry dome, and the way they sat was also very casual. Some were half lying and half lying, some had their hands on a book, some were yawning, and some even had their eyebrows drooped as if they had fallen asleep again. The master of the Starry Hall, Guyu deity, was an old man with white hair and a ruddy complexion. He had gathered these great figures who were earth-shattering in the outside world, but at this moment he did not say a word, and kept looking up at the dome of the hall, staring blankly, without any intention of speaking at all. After a long while, in the end, it was the most straightforward Tiehu deity of the heavenly law hall who could not help but glare at Guyu deity, and said in a low muffled voice, "Guyu, you have been looking at this star-moon yin-yang diagram for more than 100 years. Did you specially ask us old men to come and look at it with you today? You have all seen this diagram, right?" Guyu deity retracted his gaze, looking dazed. It did not even look like an expression that a person of his level would have. He paused and then said, "Can you see anything strange?" He said this somewhat slowly, but his words were clearly not joking. After hearing this, the expressions of the few deities at the side changed slightly, and then they all looked up. Although most people had seen this picture a long time ago, they were deity transformation stage perfected monarchs. They were like gods, so they naturally had their own advantages. No matter how old the memory was, it shouldn't be difficult for them. After a while, the eye-catching bald true Lord Tianlan, who was sitting beside true Lord Tiehu, suddenly rubbed his big head and said with a smile, "This lousy map is still as ugly as before. I can't tell." The perfected lords next to him also shook their heads. Perfected Lord Tiehu snorted coldly and said, "This magic treasure is the most precious treasure of your starry hall. Apart from you, probably no one else can see the secret hidden in it." Guyu deity was still looking up, and there was no change in his expression. After a while he suddenly took a deep breath, and then said, "That moon is about to appear." Chapter 425. When Bai Lian jumped down from the high wall, she only heard a gust of wind sweep past. Another huge shadow had already landed behind her. Moreover, it was silent, as light as a falling leaf. She looked back and saw the black dog's terrifying eyes coldly looking at her from behind. The beautiful girl in white smiled and said to the huge demonic beast, "Not bad. You're much stronger than when I saw you in Kunlun Mountain a few years ago." Atsu stared at her for a moment, then looked away without saying a word, and began to look around the messy courtyard. It was still daytime, and in order to get Atsu to come here from the alley of Horse-Washing Bridge, White Lotus had really put in a lot of effort. For example, there was a very spacious, ordinary-looking carriage parked far away on the long street outside. "Do you know Atsu?" White Lotus turned around and walked towards the peach tree that was still in full bloom. At the same time she said, "I don't like those soul formation true monarchs at all." Atsu's footsteps paused for a moment, then it walked forward again. It didn't seem to have much of a reaction, and it wasn't wrong to say that it was indifferent, even though soul formation true monarchs had an incomparably high status in the human cultivation world. In front of this dog, White Lotus seemed to be a lot more talkative than usual. It was probably because Atsu couldn't speak, so she could only talk to herself, or perhaps there were some things she kept in her heart that she never had anyone to say. Right now, speaking freely to this dog that couldn't speak was more reliable than speaking to most people. Most of the cultivators in the world can only see one soul formation true monarch in their lifetime, so they all worship and respect these people as gods. But I'm different. White Lotus waved her hand at Atsu, indicating it to follow her, then turned around and walked forward. At the same time she continued, "I've seen more than one, and I've seen them all day long. Looking at them makes me tired. I don't like my master. The one who died. He took me in as a disciple because he valued my talent, but I've been under his tutelage for so long, but from start to finish, I've never seen him smile at me once. Not even once. Do you know how it feels to face a person who is as cold as ice all day? Martial Uncle Tianlon is good to me. He often smiles at me. He also takes me to many people and treats me gently. His kindness and magnanimity almost move people in Kunlun to tears." White Lotus stopped, looked at Atsu, and said, "But do you know at that time, I was the only one in the world who could see what was hidden in his eyes. That bald man's eyes were just like you. A bloodthirsty and carnivorous demon beast. No, he was 10 times colder than you. I don't know why he kept me alive." White Lotus said, "In fact, what Lu Chen said that day was very right. After I went back and thought about it, I felt that it was very reasonable. Because if it were me, I would also find a way to kill the rebellious disciple left by my former senior brother." The girl pursed her lips, looking a little annoyed and a little helpless. It was almost difficult for her to show such emotions in front of outsiders. But soon, she calmed down and looked at her feet. The dark hole was just a foot ahead. "Here we are, let's go down and have a look." White Lotus smiled, like the delicate peach blossom on her head, and said to Atsu. The flame on the torch burned brightly, illuminating the surrounding darkness. White Lotus held the torch she brought, and carefully walked in the underground passage of the ruins of the ancient ruins. She came here once not long ago, and at that time, there was a man named Lu Chen with her. The surroundings did not seem to have changed at all. Everything was hidden in the darkness, and after being illuminated by the fire, its original appearance was revealed. However, there was nothing strange in the dilapidated walls, even the strange patterns that appeared on the walls later. But for some reason, White Lotus felt that this place seemed to be a little different from the last time she came here. She couldn't tell what was different, but she could clearly distinguish that the feeling in her heart was completely different from the last time she came here. The last time she was very quiet and calm, but this time, after entering this underground, she subconsciously became nervous. Under the calm smile, she vaguely felt that her heart seemed to be slowly beating faster. The surroundings were still so dark. She seemed to have sensed something. Is it fear? She was alone in this darkness, but she actually felt a kind of fear and terror. But why? The last time she came here with Lu Qin, she didn't feel this kind of feeling. And looking at Lu Qin, he seemed to be completely unaffected by this kind of emotion. People in this world, as long as they are normal, they will be afraid of the dark. White Lotus suddenly said to herself, then turned her head and said to Atsu, who had been following behind her, "Don't you think so, Atsu?" Her voice suddenly became low, and at that moment, she saw just behind her the huge and strong black dog that seemed to be one with the darkness. It seemed to always prefer to walk in the dark, rather than stand in the light of the torch. Although its every step followed her, there was a boundary between light and darkness. But all this was not important, because at that moment, White Lotus suddenly saw Atsu's eyes. It was a pair of strange green pupils that suddenly turned up in the darkness, and there was a cold luster flashing through the eyes, as if death was hidden in them. The black figure stopped in the darkness and then stared at her. After a while, White Lotus whispered, "Your eyes are very beautiful, Atsu." Atsu stood still. White Lotus looked at it and asked again, "Does Lu Qin know?" This time, Atsu seemed to be a little hesitant. After a while, it stepped forward, walked past White Lotus and walked towards the depths of the passage ahead. White Lotus looked at its figure, and a complicated look flashed in her eyes. After a while she also followed. The wall of rubble that blocked the road slowly appeared in front of them under the illumination of the torches. Just like the last time White Lotus came here, it was tightly sealed, and there was no gap to peep into the inside of the ruins. White Lotus looked around, and after a moment of silence, she still held the torch and began to carefully search around, probably to see if she could find anything that she had missed. Atsu stood in the dim passage, and a pair of huge dog eyes kept staring at the wall. It slowly raised its head, looking from top to bottom, and from left to right. At this time White Lotus, who was busy next to the passage, said from afar, "Atsu, look around and see if there is something wrong here. If you can really find it, I will treat you to a big meal." Atsu didn't even look at her. It just stared at the rubble wall that seemed to be piled up like a mountain. After a long time, it suddenly slowly walked forward and walked to one of the corners. At that moment, in the depths of its strange pupils, under the strange green light, there was suddenly a touch of black flame suddenly flashed. Atsu stretched out a claw of his forelimb, and tentatively, he slowly touched the wall. It was an inconspicuous place in the rubble wall. It looked like a broken pillar, flat and round like a plate. Its paw slowly touched it, and then gently patted it. Chapter 426. The taste of this dish is too good. It does seem to be not bad. Lu Qin looked at Old Ma with slight disdain and sneered. "It's not just not bad. Now I finally know why your pub business in Qingshatang village has been so bad for the past 10 years. The wine is terrible, the food is terrible, the only thing you can bring out is a bowl of boiled noodles. No one knows if I'm the only one who has eaten it in the past 10 years. Old Ma said angrily, "Nonsense. The pub business is bad, of course it's because of the small and poor village, it has nothing to do with my cooking. Even if I get the best immortal wine in this immortal city, can anyone in that village afford it?" Lu Qin curled his lips, looking disdainful, and said, "Anyway, I think this chef is a real businessman." Old Ma spat, then said, "What kind of business is this? I think this person looks like a traitor, maybe he's a sorcerer from the devil cult." Lu Qin laughed and said, "You're so unreasonable. You're slandering him as a member of the devil cult just because his cooking isn't as good?" Old Ma turned his head to look at the kitchen at the back of the pub. There was a curtain hanging there, blocking the scene inside, the layout of which was the same as most restaurants. After a while Old Ma said, "I'm just saying it casually, it's not like I'm going to arrest him immediately. Besides, this person is one of the people on the list, so he's very suspicious." Lu Chen shook his head and said, "You can't say that. The first 2 times, the gardener and the butcher died and one escaped. We didn't find any more evidence to prove that they were sorcerers from the devil cult, so we can't be sure if the third chef is from the devil cult." Old Ma raised his head and drank a mouthful of wine. He clicked his tongue and suddenly lowered his voice to say to Lu Chen, "Why do I feel that something is wrong with this matter? I can ignore the others, but this list really doesn't feel right." Lu Chen frowned but didn't say anything. Old Ma looked at his expression, and his eyes suddenly lit up. "You think so too, right? It's a little strange, and the people on the list are all in the Immortal City. With Fuyunji's past abilities, it shouldn't be difficult to find them. Why would the 2 of us be assigned to investigate?" After Lu Chen finished speaking, he was silent for a while, as if he was thinking about something. After a while he looked up at Old Ma and said, "Forget it, don't think so much. Let's go back and see the chef." "All right." Old Ma nodded and drank the wine in his cup. On Mount Celestial Dragon in Zhengxianmeng, the gathering of the 6 Divine Transformation Stage Supremes, which attracted the attention of the world, actually ended much faster than most people expected. When they entered the hall, there were 6 figures, but when they walked out, there were only 5. The only one who didn't follow them out was the master of the Star Hall, Guyu. Many people waiting in the distance saw the 5 figures in front of the hall, and there was an immediate uproar in the crowd. However, perhaps out of respect for these big shots who occupied the peak of the human cultivation world, the others didn't run forward for the time being. In front of the hall, 5 deity transformation stage perfected monarchs stood side by side with different expressions on their faces. There was almost no interaction or greeting between them, and no one else could tell what had happened in the hall from the expressions on their faces. "I heard that our immortal allies has been flourishing recently, and there are many strange people competing to join us." The first to speak was Immortal Tiehu. His usually stern and cold voice sounded like a knife, making people feel uncomfortable. "Am I right, Tianlan?" After this last sentence was asked, the originally calm front of the Star Hall suddenly became dead silent. The other 3 Divine Transformation Stage Supremes all looked at Immortal Tiehu, and after a while, they all looked at Immortal Tianlan, who was standing not far from Immortal Tiehu. Immortal Tianlan smiled very gently and politely, and even looked a little embarrassed. He used his hand to gently touch his unusually bright bald head. "Indeed, it is all thanks to the hard work of the Supremes that our Zhengxianmeng can have today's situation. Only then can we win the hearts of the world." The Supremes next to him nodded slightly, obviously not repulsed by Immortal Tianlan's flattery. From this, it could also be seen that people who were high and mighty like the Divine Transformation Stage Supremes had long lost interest in all kinds of flattery. However, based on the current situation, it should be to distinguish who the flatterer was, and what was the identity of the flatterer. Immortal Tiehu smiled coldly, looked at Immortal Tianlan with some arrogance, and directly walked down the stone steps. Suddenly, many people rushed out from the crowd in the distance, crowded around him, and quickly left. The expressions of the other 3 Divine Transformation Stage Perfected Lords changed slightly, but they quickly returned to normal. None of them spoke to Perfected Lord Tianlan, and after nodding politely, they had no intention of getting involved in this matter, and went their separate ways. Soon, Perfected Lord Tianlan was the only one left in front of the Starry Palace. However, his expression still looked very calm, and there was also a smile on his face, as if nothing had happened just now. However, when he occasionally looked back at the Star Hall, there seemed to be a hint of worry in the depths of his eyes. "The blood moon that has not been seen for 1,000 years. He whispered to himself, and seemed to swallow the words after that. No one could hear him more clearly. White Lotus carefully searched the nearby passageways with a torch, but in the end, she found nothing, just like when Lu Chen was here that day. She seemed to be a little unhappy and muttered, "Could it be that all the good things have been taken away by him?" However, as she said that, she shook her head, probably thinking that it was more likely that there was actually no secret here. Otherwise, with her and Lu Chen's abilities, it was impossible that they could not find anything. However, the situation today was a little different, because apart from herself, there was also a huge black dog. White Lotus turned around and walked towards Atsu, and at the same time said, Atsu, have you looked around here, including the black runes on the wall? Is there anything? Halfway through her sentence, she suddenly stopped and frowned at the same time. This was because in her vision, the black dog did not sniff around the surrounding ground to look for secrets, nor did it lie on the two sides of the passageway to carefully look at the remnant rune patterns on the wall. From the beginning until now, Atsu only stood in one place, under the wall of rubble. Its pair of eyes stared fixedly at the stone, green light flashing, and darkness surging. After an unknown period of time, a red light suddenly reflected in White Lotus's clear eyes. A strange shadow slowly appeared on the strange round stone in front of Atsu. It looked a little round and a little blurry. But most importantly, the shadow was not black, but red with a strong aura. Blood red. It was a blood red moon. Chapter 427. What's going on with Fuyunji? There's something wrong with the name list they gave us. As they walked out of the tavern, Old Ma lowered his voice and complained to Lu Chen. What's wrong with that chef? Isn't he just an ordinary person who works honestly? He doesn't have any cultivation or magic power. How could he be related to the evil sect? Lu Chen also looked a little puzzled, frowning slightly. After a while he said, that name list was given to me by that damn Baldi himself. Fuyunji wouldn't dare to deceive him. Maybe we've made a mistake. What secret did that chef have that we didn't notice? Old Ma snorted and said, what secret place is it? Tell me. Lu Chen smiled bitterly and said, didn't I say that I might not have noticed? But that shouldn't be the case. It's one thing to deceive me, but you've been in this line of work for decades. You have a wealth of experience and unique insight. There's no way I can fool you. Old Ma's expression changed. He almost laughed out loud. Then he coughed dryly, nodded and said seriously, what you said is very reasonable. Lu Chen sent a flying kick at him. Old Ma smiled and moved out of the way. Then he walked up to Lu Chen and said, the Floating Clouds office must have found something suspicious about the people on this list, but they haven't confirmed it yet. That's why they sent it to us through the True Sovereign. I think they wouldn't deliberately deceive True Monarch. But what exactly did they find? They didn't tell us at all, causing us to have to start from the beginning. This is not right. Lu Chen pondered for a moment, suddenly looked at Old Ma, said, did you offend that Schwerin Hall leader recently? Old Ma's face stiffened, said, don't talk nonsense with my identity. How would I dare to offend that person? Lu Chen said, I think maybe that person is purposely giving us a difficult problem, to test us. Old Ma rolled his eyes, said, I'm just a small fry, how could Schwerin like me? I think this thing is aimed at you. Lu Chen snorted, said, why is it aimed at me? Old Ma laughed, don't play dumb. She's a hall leader of Fuyunji. Even in Zhangxianmeng, she can do whatever she wants except for those true monarchs. What is there to be afraid of? Lu Chen looked at Old Ma. Old Ma smiled faintly. After a while, Lu Chen suddenly sighed, and said, let's go back. With that he walked forward. Old Ma followed and asked him hesitantly, then what about the chef today? Lu Chen thought for a while, and said, come early tomorrow, secretly follow him and observe for a while, see if there's anything strange. If there's still nothing, then replace him. Old Ma nodded, then said as if thinking, actually, I have a feeling that this chef might really be Fuyunji's people being suspicious. Look at the chef's skills today, and his knife skills when he was in the kitchen, cutting meat and vegetables so skillfully. It's obvious that he's been working as a chef all his life. There's no problem. Lu Chen laughed coldly, said, what you said, it's all your own imagination. If you really want to put it this way, if you say his knife skills are good, I'll say it's knife skills. Cutting meat fast? Maybe it's because he cut too much human meat. Hey, Old Ma said angrily. I just came out from that pub. Don't talk nonsense. I was so scared that I almost vomited. Lu Chen laughed and reached out to pat Old Ma's shoulder, then suddenly said with some emotion, but today is also a little unexpected. What? I didn't see that Song Wenji. If she also has that list, shouldn't she also come? Strange. On Mount Tianlong, in the Hall of Heavenly Law, this time, it was not in the solemn main hall of the Hall of Heavenly Law, but in another secluded room. However, the people were still the same, It was still immortal Tiehu and his adopted daughter Song Wenji. Perhaps because this was a more private place, Taihu Supreme was much more relaxed. He was wearing a soft and comfortable nightgown, and was half lying on a large reclining chair. One of his hands was placed flat on his side, while the other was holding a crystal-clear jade cup. Inside the cup was an unknown but strangely blood-red wine. From time to time, he would bring it to his mouth and take a sip, after which his face would reveal a satisfied expression. This seemed to be a comfortable life of an immortal, especially the charming Song Wenji, who was kneeling on the ground beside his thighs, with a smile on her face, her cheeks slightly red. She looked really beautiful, like a peach, and stretched out her hands to gently massage his thighs. After a while, Song Wenji smiled and said, "Father, do you feel better?" True monarch Taihu opened his eyes and said with a doting smile, much better, much better. Thanks to you, my old bones can finally enjoy a good time." Song Wenji burst out laughing and said, "Look at you. You are one of the 6 great immortals of Zhengxianmeng. You can call the wind and summon the rain in the cultivation world of the entire divine land, but now you make it sound so pitiful." Immortal Tiehu sighed, stretched out his hand and gently patted Song Wenji's hand, then sat up and motioned for her to sit beside him. Song Wenji stood up and dragged a round stool from the side, and sat beside immortal Tiehu, then obediently placed his free hand on her thighs, and gently massaged him, looking really filial. Immortal Tiehu's eyes were full of love, and he looked very satisfied. He even stretched out one of his hands and grabbed Song Wenji's plump thighs, then sighed and said, "It's all an undeserved reputation. Look at how high and mighty I have been all these years. Almost everyone in the world looks at me the same way. And here at Heavenly Law Hall, for many years I could only maintain a righteous aura, and be solemn and self-restrained. Even the slightest mistake would cause all kinds of gossip. In fact, I have been cultivating all my life, and when I was young, I wholeheartedly worked for the world's righteousness, and for the dignity of Heavenly Law Hall, I worked myself to death. Now that I think about it, it's really a great injustice." Song Wenji's hands slightly paused, and her head slightly drooped down, making it difficult for others to see her expression. But then she softly said, "How can that be? Everyone in the world, including Zhengxianmeng, respects you very much." Immortal Tiehu snorted, with a disdainful look in his eyes. His withered palm gently stroked Song Wenji's thighs, and at the same time said, "I have finally seen through them. Those people only want me to be a saint, but they are sanctimonious and seek pleasure every day, damn it." As he spoke, he glanced at Song Wenji with a smile on his face and said, "Fortunately, my luck is not bad, and I can still meet you in my old age. I have no regrets in my old age." Song Wenji glanced at him with a faint smile and said, "Foster father, if you talk nonsense again, I will be angry." Immortal Tiehu laughed and waved his hand, saying, all right, I know you are thin-skinned, then I won't say any more." Song Wenji smiled, and then seemed to think of something, and said, "Foster father, there is something I want to ask you. Why don't you let me continue to look for the people on the list?" Immortal Tiehu said lightly, "Give Tianlan some face. Not long ago I made him lose face. In this matter, if you follow too closely, it will be too much of a loss if someone in Fuyunji secretly plots against you." Song Wenji was startled and said, "With Immortal Tianlan's identity, he won't make things difficult for a little girl like me, right?" Immortal Tiehu took a sip of the strange blood-red wine in the cup, slightly narrowed his eyes, and said, "Generally speaking, people like immortals will naturally be proud of their identity, but this person Tianlan." He was silent for a moment, and then continued, "In the past 10 years, the world has been peaceful. In the whole Zhengxianmeng, only his Fuyunji has always been fighting with the devil cult, both openly and secretly, so there have been countless casualties. This person is also the most murderous immortal of Huashan realm in the immortal allies for hundreds of years." His white eyebrows slightly wrinkled, and said, "It is not that I am afraid of him, but it is better to be cautious with this person." You're tuning in to the Echoes of the Heart YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.